Okay, hi everybody. I'm just going to wrap up our sort of intro to sustainability with this very short video. And what I first want to do is talk a little bit about animals and sustainability, and then talk a bit about agriculture. Now, when we talk about animals and sustainability, what we're really talking about are herbivores, meaning plant-eating animals. These are the animals that people tend to eat. Um, and you have to think about why animals were sort of picked in the first place to act as either beasts of burden or something to eat. So what are these benefits? The biggest one is that these herbivores eat plants that we cannot eat. So we're not eating, or we're not out there eating grass and weeds and so on, but they actually eat these things that we can't, and then they produce meat, which then we eat. They also provide other parts, as I've listed here: skin, ligaments, bone, etc., that especially people in the ancient world certainly used quite a bit of. And of course, the other big reason to have animals are that they're beasts of burden, meaning that they do work. So when plows were first discovered, they strapped animals to them and the animals could pull. The animals can also grind grain if they're attached to one of those circular things. You see that a lot in a lot of ancient Roman cities and so on. You do have to ask, are animals sustainable? So in like a lot of these answers, the answer can be yes or no. I mean, yes, they can be if farmers are very careful about not having too many animals. So if you have the right amount, which of course really depends on your population that you're talking about, then they can go all right because they give you manure, which fertilizes the ground, and ancient people certainly knew about that. Now the problem gets to be where there's too many animals, or where you have the wrong animal in the wrong place. So where, say for example, you put lots of cattle on a hillside, they break up the ground, they eat a lot of the grass, and that leads to massive amounts of erosion, and then the fertility in the soil goes down. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of this slide that we're primarily talking about herbivores or plant-eating animals. We rarely eat carnivores, and I have a question here like, why is that the case? Part of the answer is that there's just not a lot of them. So in a previous lecture, I talked about sort of this food chain where you've got plants at the bottom, lots of little animals, larger animals, and then the carnivores sitting at the top. There's just not enough of them for us to eat. Okay, and then when you talk about animals, we also can talk about hunting. So, and especially this is the case in the ancient world where you get a number of benefits from hunting animals. Now, we're not talking about domesticated animals here. We're really talking about wild animals. So teamwork. So hunting takes a lot of teamwork to get these animals in the right position, to chase them down, and then to kill them. And then of course you've got food sharing. So people kill animals and then they share what they've killed between them. Now, when you think about this type of sharing, what the next stage you usually get is what I just have here called enhanced social organization. So people get together, they share, they start making different groups. And of course, this also leads to some gene sharing. So people of different groups having children. And so sharing of the genes, spreading of the genes. So there's some possible benefits of hunting. Okay, now I want to talk, sort of switch gears and talk a little bit about extinction, since we're talking about sustainability. So there are natural factors, and I've given you here page 62 and following from Redmond, one of our textbooks, where he talks about this. So when you're talking about natural extinction and sort of the chances of this occurring, it really depends on the species that you're talking about and the size. So as I put here, larger species in large areas have a lesser chance of extinction just because they can spread out in a wide area. Now, when you get species of a similar size, wider fluctuations in abundance can lead to extinction. So what that means is if there are really a lot of them over here and not very many over here, and they're of the same size, that can lead to issues with population groups. And of course, megafauna or large animals have a greater chance of extinction just because they're greater, they need larger areas. They don't reproduce as fast as, say, mice, when you're talking about a tiger to a mice or a mouse. And so that's one of the reasons why megafauna have a greater chance of extinction. Now, when you think about extinction, you also have to think about what humans can do. And we certainly know that humans can cause extinction in animal and plant populations. So first one we can talk about is overkill, meaning people have killed too many animals for them to naturally raise their populations back. Habitat destruction is something, this happens in the ancient world, happens today, where we, say, drain swamps and drain marshes where animals had a habitat, and of course they don't have that anymore, and that leads to extinction. People have also been known to introduce predators to get rid of other animals. So this is the case. I can think there are some very famous ones, like the introduction of these large frogs into Australia to control populations, and it just doesn't work. So it can lead to extinction. It can also lead to other trouble. Introduction of competitors like people into a new environment. That can certainly lead to extinction of animals and plants. And of course, we've got very famous examples of introduced diseases, which can lead to extinction. And then these secondary extinctions, meaning if one type of animal is dependent on another, and in the first group goes extinct, then that can lead to issues all the way down the chain. We also have to think in terms of sustainability, the impacts of agriculture, so planting on the land. And again, you can look at Redmond, page 81 and following for a more detailed description of this. But once the land is cleared, it really affects what we can do with that. So in a lot of cases, when people farm the land, water is diverted, meaning they take water from one stream and then they irrigate fields using that same stream, or they pump it up from underground and then spread it on top of the ground. One thing this also does is it disperses the predators. Now, we just talked about some extinction events, both natural and man-made. When predatory animals are dispersed, what that means is that the animals that they were preying on, their populations can explode. So let's say, for example, like rabbits. You get rid of wolves, they eat rabbits, you might get a great increase in the number of rabbits, which of course can impact agriculture because rabbits will eat lots of green things. And then finally, in this last slide, we have the impact of agriculture on human populations. And some of this makes sense, and we've talked about this before. Obviously, when you've got more food, you have an increased population. When you start to get agriculture, people are planting farms, so human groups do not move away from that farming area because they don't have to. They're not foraging so much anymore. And then this creates what I put here as sedentary populations, meaning they sit in certain places and they form villages and the cities and so on. This sedentarianism really changes a lot of things for humans. So, and I've just listed a few here. Changes in family and societal structure. So you get political things happening. You get new economic models growing out of having people staying in one spot and relying on farmers. Of course, you also get a different type of organization of productive tasks, meaning if you're a farmer, you're out working in the field. If you're not a farmer, maybe your job now is to build pottery or to cut down trees and make houses or metallurgy, whatever it is. You get these tasks being broken up. And then, of course, one thing you get is an accumulation of goods. So when you are not dependent on farming and your economy goes into sort of a barter system, you can trade. And people, we've seen over time, this happens in the modern period, they like to accumulate things. And so this is what happens again when you've got a population that sits in one spot. They have a house, they have a family, they have neighbors, and so lots of things change because of the impacts of agriculture on human populations.